Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned?
This is a topic that people don't really speak of. They're ashamed, they don't know what to do about it, and they also feel very constrained about what society thinks about it. More than 850,000 men are afflicted with this every year and 1.5 million women. What I'm talking about is domestic violence. I'd like to welcome Linda Mills and find out about what happened to her in domestic violence and what she did about it. Linda, welcome.
Thank you
nice to
very
have
much,
you
Barrie.
with us. Why don't we just start at the beginning and talk about what happened to you that changed your life?
About 20 years ago, I became involved in an abusive relationship that started, like most relationships, as most abusive relationships, as a passionate love affair. I fell in love with this man, and we were intimate almost immediately and became very, very close and attached. And slowly but surely I started to see some signs of possessiveness and of his kind of obsession with me. And although I was concerned about it, I also liked very much the attention that I was getting. And over time, it started with first a hit to the arm. And then I said to him, you know, a hit to the arm is not okay. No hitting is okay. And then it was a push, and I said, just like hitting, a push isn't okay. And then he spit at me, and I said, spitting isn't okay. Of course, I hadn't put together that all three of these events or occurrences were actually very much intertwined in the beginnings of an abusive relationship. At some point in our relationship, well into it, maybe at a year or a year and a half, he and I were having an argument, and he raped me. Ultimately, it was a second push that actually got me to leave the abusive relationship. It was then that I realized this really was all very much a part of a dynamic that I was engaged in with him, and that I needed to end it.
What did you do to end it?
Well, initially I had, at various points in our relationship, we had talked about getting couples counseling. It was clear to me that he had a very troubled childhood. Interestingly enough, he had been in, his family was dysfunctional. His mother was quite ill, and she was very abusive towards him. His father was pretty much absent from the family. And so it was clear to me that together we could do some, I myself am a therapist, and that together we could do some important therapeutic work that would build us up as a couple, but also explore the origins of his abuse. And so we would pursue this couple's work, and initially we contacted several therapists, and they refused to see us because we had this abuse in our history.
They refused to see you because you had abuse in your history. Then where were you supposed to go to seek help?
Well, that was exactly the dilemma that started me on the journey that I've been on for the last 20 years. And so it was clear that the pathway that I was familiar with, namely a kind of therapeutic pathway, was not even available to me as a middle-class woman seeking help from peers, right? Because I myself was a therapist, a social worker, and so was he. And so it was shocking that therapists wouldn't see us. And that was in the first go-around. And then in the second go-around, when at this point I was pretty clear I was going to leave the relationship, we went to a second therapist, and we went back to a set of therapists, and finally somebody agreed to see us.
So that changed your life. Did it change the relationship that you stayed with him, or you realized that this is not going to work out?
Yeah, the therapist was really quite skilled at being able to address domestic violence, which is clearly necessary if you're going to get couples counseling or a therapeutic approach to address violence. And she was quite skilled. And one of the questions she posed to me, or one of the statements she said to me, which sort of changed my entire perspective — we've been in therapy maybe a few weeks — and she said to me, you know, Linda, I'm not sure you're ever going to leave him. And I walked out of the therapy session that day and I said to him, I need a week. I really need to think. It's been a very intense time and we need to take a break. By the end of that week, I had decided that I was going to leave him. And I think that in this kind of intervention is called a paradoxical intervention, and I took in what the therapist was saying to me, namely that I would never leave him. The idea that I was going to stay with this man who had hurt me in so many ways over a course of a year and a half or 2 years, you know, it just hit me over the head, and I was done.
Well, I definitely applaud you for taking action and realizing the situation is not going to change, because I know so many women and men who stay in an abusive situation and it just drags you down and drags you down. And yet I have had people send me letters saying, what can I do and where do I go? And now that you've got this book, Violent Partners, a breakthrough plan for ending the cycle of abuse, now I know what to do. Because before it was like, talk to your attorney, talk to a psychologist, but we're in a round-robin situation.
I think what I discovered, so I went on this journey, it's been 20 years, and Violent Partners is the culmination of that journey. What's clear is that there are a variety of options for people when they have or are in a violent relationship. There aren't enough options, and we need to make these alternative approaches more available for people, but at least we're very much on the way. The couples counseling option, for example, which I discuss in great detail in the book, is one that has served people well over the years. In other words, it really does help people both realize that the relationship must end, but it also, in circumstances, helps a couple get better so that they don't have to resort to violence, and I tell those stories in the book.
One of the things that I think is handicapping in our society is that the police can only do so much when there has been a domestic call saying there is abuse, and I know many times the police are even afraid to go because of their lives. How do they handle it, or what would you suggest for them to do to handle it?
The police actually, although these circumstances are obviously scary no matter when you intervene, and they're high stakes emotionally speaking, that the police have gotten quite skilled at being able to address domestic violence in terms of knowing that the goal that night is to separate the couple. And that can be a very good thing for people who are at it back and forth, and we want to prevent a devastating event like the possibility of a death that evening. So the police have a very important role to play. On the other hand, most people do not call the police. So fewer than 25%, about 27% of women call the police when a man has been abusive towards them, and about 13% of men call the police. So the largest percentage of people who are experiencing domestic violence never involve the police in their lives.
Okay, there's such a high percentage of people who do not call the police or get out of an abusive situation. Is there something that friends, family, and coworkers can do to help remedy the situation?
What's happened is that the only approach that has been promoted for domestic violence is leaving the abusive relationship. And until we recognize that most people, or at least a majority, if not a large minority, and we don't know those statistics, are going to stay in the abusive relationship, then really our options are very different. So what's happened is family and friends feel like their only option is to encourage the people to separate. And if they don't want to take that option, then all of a sudden they feel they're sort of at a dead end. And that's not helpful for people, because they feel like, oh, this is the only thing I have to offer the person I love, the people I love, who are going through such a terrible thing. So really the issue is a reframing, and in that reframing we need to encourage people that they can get help for the abuse in their lives, that it is possible, not only possible, but people feel hopeful about the possibility of actually ending violence. And we have to promote that as an option, and that will require a kind of rethinking of the entire system.
Well, would you say that a lot of women stay in an abusive relationship because of the financial situation of A, they might have children, they don't, and what are they going to do, where are they going to go, and where are they going to get money?
I think women stay for a host of reasons, and actually men stay in abusive relationships for the same reasons. They stay for children, they stay for finances, they stay for family ties, they stay out of religious reasons, and finally they also stay for fear. And out of fear. And it is clear that we need to help people understand why they're staying, whether or not those are good reasons for staying, whether they're valuable reasons that they want to hold on to, and that if those are good reasons and they decide they absolutely do want to stay, we need to help them stay in a way that is safe.
What is a way for them to stay that is safe, that they're not going to be abused? Because there's also the verbal abuse. People think of physical, but there's the verbal.
Also need to realize is that abuse is not one-sided, and that oftentimes in abusive relationships there's what's called a dynamic. That doesn't mean that the victim, for example, is responsible for the abuse that happens to them. It may mean, however, that they don't even realize that there's something they're saying or doing that could trigger in the abuser the abusive behavior. And until we recognize that